Alright, so in the last video, we created our Firebase project and we also created the Firestore database. And within that database, we created a collection of jobs, which basically will be having all the jobs in our application that we display over here. And within that jobs collection, we created one document or one job manually. So let's do one thing. Let's import all the documents. For now it's only one, but the essential point is to import all the documents from the jobs collection and display it on the front end on our application. So let's get started. And over here, as you can see, that we were using job data, which was an array of objects, and we were using the hard-coded value. Now the thing is, we need to use a data which can change throughout the life of our application, and that sort of data best goes inside of state so that we can kind of update it as well. So we shall use the useState React hook from React, and over here, the useState React hook is basically used to implement the state within a functional component in a React. And let's get started. So the useState first takes it takes in an argument, and that argument is basically the default state, or you can say the initial state. So for now it would be an empty array, and this function, when executed, it returns back an array of 2 elements, and we need to save those elements as well. And the first element of that array is basically the state, and as we are working with the jobs, and this would be a list, an array of jobs. So let's name it as jobs, and the second element within that array would be a function that will allow us to change the state. And there is a convention of using set set as a prefix to that function. So let's name it as set jobs. Now we need to use this jobs state instead of job data to map over it. Now if we save it right now, obviously we won't be able to see anything because it's an empty array. And the thing is, we need to make the request to our Cloud Firestore and fetch all the documents from the jobs collection. So let's get started. Let's create a function called fetch jobs that's going to make the asynchronous call to our Firestore database. And I will be using async and await for the same purposes instead of then the callbacks. So over here, let's get started. And now we shall make the request to the Firestore database, and we shall name it as request await Firestore, and we need to import the not like this, and we need to import the Firestore instance that we created over here in the config file within the app. And we can remove this for now, the job data, we do not really need it. And let's import from the Firebase config, and the thing that we want to import is Firestore. And now we can use the Firestore to kind of refer to the collection, and we can do that by chaining in a collection, and the name of our collection was jobs, and that's exactly what we will be using, jobs. And now if we check the document, the first the job document for the job that we created manually, we have a field called posted on, and we actually need we actually want to use this field to order our jobs. The thing is, we need to fetch all the documents from the jobs collection, but they should be an order of posted on, so that we can make the request of we can fetch the recently added to the later one, and that is by the order, by using the order by function. We can chain it onto the collection, and the first argument that it takes is the field which we need to use for the purpose of ordering, and the second one in which order that you want to use. And there are 2 options, ASC and DSCE, which basically ascending and descending, and we will be using the descending one, so that the job which are posted most recently gets to the top. And now we need to make the request by calling the get function, and this request will if we check this right now, this request is going to return back the array, it's going to return back all the different documents. But the thing is, we have not yet made this we have not yet called this function, and we can do by using another hook using React, and from the React, and that is useEffect. Now useEffect is basically a hook which is triggered on every render as well as the first initial one, and the best place to actually call this function is as soon as the user visits the application. So that's exactly what we will be doing is we will be using the useState. It takes in 2 arguments. So the first argument is a function which is triggered on every render, and the second argument is basically an array upon like array of dependency. And looking at this dependency, it makes the decision whether or not this function should be rendered or not. And now what we need to do is firstly we need to pass in an empty array so that we only make this request, like we only call this function on the first initial load, because useEffect is called on every render as well as on the initial one, and that's it. Like we do not want to make this, like we don't want to call this function on every change, only on the first one. So that's exactly what we will be doing, and we shall call it in such a manner like we are making the request. And we do not need to use the async and await, and actually you cannot use that within the useEffect. And now we will be making the fetch jobs request, or we will be calling this function as soon as the user lands on the application or visits the application. So let's have a look. And if we open the console, and I think there are a few errors that we need to fix. So the first, okay, it's something related to the dialog box. So what we can do is we can kind of comment this out for now. And as you can see, we did see something related to the request that we made. And this, like the data that we are getting back, like the data we are consoling, the request, it is not actually descriptive, but as you can see that it has a property, and that is basically a docs, named at docs, and which is an array. Now the way is like it is getting us one document or one element. Now that's kind of intuitive that that document is this one, because that's the only document that we have within the jobs collection. And in order to parse, or in order to use that document, we need to loop over the document array and to kind of get the data out of it. And we can do that by going to request. Now this is the request, and within the request we need to map over the docs array and docs. And for each, we can use for each because that's an array, and the first one would be job. And in order to view the data, we need to call a function. Now I'm using the console.log, and the job, we need to call a function on individual like element within that array, and that is data. Now it's going to give us the data, the actual data in those job document. And now if we have a look, it should, yeah, it is giving us back the data of the only document that we have. So let me just go back again what we are doing. So the useEffect hook is triggered on every render, and we only want to like call this function on the initial load. That's why we are passing in an array as the second argument, and that array is empty. So that essentially means that this function, like the useEffect, will only be triggered on the first one, and we do not want to like call it again and again like on every render. Otherwise, if you do not pass in an array, it's gonna cause a problem when you make some changes in our application. And that's why we make some state change in our application, and that's why we are passing in an empty array. So this function only gets called on the first render. So that's perfect. Now this function is making just an asynchronous call to the Firestore database, and we are fetching all the documents from the jobs collection and ordering them in an order of like the posted on, and that too in the descending order. And we are making a request, and now we are fetching back the documents that we get in the request, and we are looping over them, and we get the the individual job document, and we are just using the data on it so that we actually get the data that we are looking for. And now the thing is, we actually need to save the data in an array, and that's exactly what we will be doing. And we shall do it in such a manner of set, like we can name it as temp jobs, because initially eventually we will be saving this array to the job state using the set jobs. But now let's change for each to map so that it returns back an array, and let's return this job data for now. And if we console.log this temp job, it should be jobs, by the way, jobs. Okay, I forgot the console.log. Now we shall see the array of jobs, the actual jobs. Now as you can see, we do have the data, we have an array, and that array contains one document or one object, which is the actual job, which is the actual the job. Now the first thing is, if you remember, we also need to have an ID, and as I told you earlier, that we would be using the document ID as an ID within the within the job document. And a lot of time developers make the mistake of creating and like individual ID, like creating a field inside of it and like having some random data within it. But that's of no point. You can actually use the document ID because that's like unique as well, and that's exactly what we will be doing. And over here, like when we return back the data of individual job, let's return back an object and just spread the object that we have. So like essentially it's doing the exact same thing. If we have a look, it's not making any difference. It's just creating an object and spreading out the data within that, the data that we get back from the job. So it won't make much difference. It's the same thing, but the purpose of it is to actually add another field onto this one, and we can do this by using ID of ID. And now this job document that we are using the we are using the data function on. This job also contains the document ID, and when we can refer to it as job.id. So this ID would be the document ID that we have over here. And the thing is, we are spreading out the exact same data of a job, but we are also adding in the ID to it. So that's the main purpose. So let's have a look right now. And now we have the array and we have the document, and as you can see, now we also have another field, like the extra field of ID, and that's great. Now we can use this ID to map over and basically use it as a key as well. So that's perfect. Now we actually need to save the temp jobs within the set jobs, and if like as soon as we do that, the job state would be updated and we are kind of mapping it over it, so everything will fall in place. So let's do that using, we shall call the set jobs function and pass in the set jobs, which is the array that we actually want. So let's have a look. And as you can see, it's working perfectly fine. The job card that we are seeing, it is actually the document that we have in the database. So that is perfect. Now there's one more thing left, and that is, if you have a look at the data, it's saying NaN. So that's basically not a number. And the reason to this is, in our Firestore database, we actually have the posted on as a timestamp, and the timestamp kind of works differently in the Firestore, and we have to work accordingly. So the thing is, like if we have a look right now, we need to add in the posted on next to it. So if we are actually adding a different value, so it will override the data within the within the document that we are fetching, and we need to do in such a manner that the job.data, which will again give us the same object of which will give us the same content of the object of our job document, and within that object we need to refer to the posted on, exactly what we have. But the way this works is that the Firestore creates a server timestamp, and that's exactly what we have over here, and we need to kind of parse it, or we need to kind of format it for the purpose of seeing it on the front end. And the main reason to this, like the way we can do that is by calling a toDate function on it, on the timestamp that we get from the Firestore database. So let's have a look right now. And yep, now it is actually working fine. It's like 5:05 like minutes ago. And the thing is, like if like some of you might be thinking that this is not the best way to format data, and particularly to show the difference of minutes, and I do agree on that one. And the way you can kind of fix this, like if we go back to the job card that we have over here, and the way like the way it is working is that it is taking the first state, like the starting one and the later one. And the way you can kind of fix this is, like I won't be doing this in this tutorial to make it simple, but the way you can approach it is by checking the difference, and if the difference is more than 60 minutes, so in that case you can use the other function that the library gives us, which is difference. And now it gives us a lot of different, like a lot of functions which kind of calculate the difference, and you can use different in hours or months or years, that you can do all of that. Like you can format it accordingly, but for now let's just keep it simple as difference in minutes. And although it does not look nice, but it is actually giving us the minute, and so let's just keep it to that for now. And if we have a look, now it's working perfectly fine. So we are actually fetching the jobs out of the jobs collection, and we are rendering it on the front end. So that is perfect. So, and while we are on it, let's do one thing. Like if we reloaded right now, we can see that it's making the request. So let's show some loader like in the meantime, like while it's making the request, so that user does know that it like there's something happening. And for the same purposes, for making the loader and saving the state of that loader, let's use the useState hook again, and let's add as set the the loading and set loading, and we shall use the useState. And the initial state for the loading would be like eventually, like as we know that this would be a boolean, whether true or false, and depending upon that we will be showing the loader. And the initial state to this would be true, because as soon as the user visits the application, it would be loading by default. So let's set it as true, and we shall use this state over here, and we can do this below the search bar, and we can check if the loading is true. So that means we are like there's something happening in the background, and if that is true, we shall show a circular progress. Now this is a component out of the material UI library, which is basically a loader that kind of, you will see what it is, and we shall show a circular progress bar, and we will change it in a while, like shortly. And if it is not loading, then we can kind of map over the jobs, and for that purposes we can do it in such a manner. And let's just remove this, and let's have a look to what we have. But we also need to change the set loading as well. And the thing is, like as soon as the first as soon as the request is done, this request is made, let's change the set loading. Like when we change this like at the very end, when we change this job state, let's set as set loading to be of false. So like the initial one would be true, and when the request is made and we are setting it inside the set jobs, like we are changing the job state, we are turning the loading as off. So let's have a look now, and yep, it is working fine. But as you can see, it is kind of aligned to the left, and we can fix that obviously. And as I told you that we will be formatting it, so what we can do is we can wrap it in a box component, and let's have the display of flex and justify content of center. So let's have a look now. So yep, that's looking much better. So yeah, now we have the data in the Firestore database, and we are fetching it on the front end, so everything is working perfectly fine. So by the next video, let's begin with the post job. Like we have the modal. Now I actually comment this out, so that's why it's not showing, but we will be using that modal to create new jobs and basically post those jobs in the Firestore database. And as soon as the post is made, we shall kind of refetch the entire list. So that's what we are aiming for. So see you in the next video then.